What is up, Bears fans? Kevin Wells, Drew Cole, and Eric Lambert on the Club Dub podcast. A huge episode of the Club Dub podcast tonight. Waves are changing at Hallis Hall. The Bears believe in Justin Fields. They're trading significant fan favorites from the defense. It's a new wave. It's a new team. And I'm feeling pretty optimistic about this club's future. Guys, we're going to get into all of it tonight. Initial reactions from everything that happened today. The White Sox got a new manager. A famous rapper was killed. The news was all over the road today. And unfortunately, it was just so I'm so tired of I've been covering it all day, but I feel really good about the Bears news. I don't love the Chase Claypool acquisition, but I don't hate it. I love what it signals, and I want to hear your guys' thoughts on this. Let's start right there. Let's literally hop right into it. Chase Claypool is a Chicago Bear for a second-round pick. It's a guy that is going to make this offense better. It might not be great, but he's a guy that automatically hops in and makes it better. What do you guys think?
I think everything that Poles has done up to this point has made logical sense, and that more than anything has been refreshing because trading Robert Quinn made sense. He's 32 years old. He probably wasn't going to be here next year. You want to get something back for him if you can. You get a fourth-round pick. You clear up the cap space next year. Sense. They negotiated with him all offseason, couldn't find a middle ground. It looked like they probably weren't going to ever find a middle ground with him, so the Bears had a choice to make. Let him play out the year, and maybe in 2024 you can get a third-round pick for him once he signs somewhere else, or you can try to get something right now, and the Bears chose that option. They traded him to Baltimore. You get a second and fifth-round picks back. Mm-hmm. Maybe not what everybody would have wanted, but it's still a decent package for an off-the-ball linebacker who, really hadn't looked all that great in terms of the system he was playing in, even though his numbers were pretty decent, over the course of the year. So again, makes sense. And then the Claypool trade was the big surprise because people felt that the Bears were purely in sell mode right now. They're just loading up on assets and they're going to focus on the offseason. But I think Poles recognized that next year's wide receiver crop, both free agency and the draft, are kind of weak, both because of injuries and because certain guys have already been locked up, going into this year. So he had a choice to make. Claypool was available. He might not be the true blue number one guy that everybody wants, but he's better than most of the guys they've got on this roster. And once the Smith trade went through and they got that extra second-round pick, he felt more comfortable making a run at Claypool at that point because he'll still have 5 picks in the top 4 rounds. So he'll still be sitting pretty with draft capital, and he secures a 24-year-old wide receiver, 6'4", 4.4 speed, has been productive before. It made logical sense to give him to Justin Fields and help out your quarterback and finally do that thing that people accused him of not doing the entire offseason. So, it was a logical trade, makes sense to me. I like the player. I've liked Claypool a lot, even though he's been kind of having a down year, but I don't blame that entirely on him. The quarterback situation there is a mess. The offensive coordinator still gets a ton of crap over there from Steelers fans. So,
they got a horrible offensive line in Pittsburgh too. I mean,
yes,
you got dealing with a rookie quarterback in Mitch Trubisky and then the ghost of Ben Roethlisberger last year. Come on. He's going to have a better opportunity here.
Yeah, and I think he and Justin actually fit well in terms of skill sets. He's more of a deep threat type of guy. He likes to get vertical. Justin obviously likes to throw vertical, so they sort of mesh in that regard. So I like the trade. Would I have preferred you get him for cheaper? Of course, you always prefer that. But, all in all, I don't think they gave up. I don't think they mortgaged the future to get him. I think they got themselves a good, talented player who can fit well with this quarterback, and they're still sitting pretty with all that money, still 8 draft picks. I think it was a good move on their part.
Yeah, I think so too. I'm not going to rehash everything. I think Eric laid it out really well, but I think that the process just made a lot of sense. I think obviously you look at Robert Quinn, made absolutely no sense to keep him on the roster beyond what they already got from him, implementing the culture and the scheme here over the first half of the season. It made perfect sense to let him go. They got a 4th-round pick. This is the year that they can absorb some of that contract. We saw that happen with the Robert Quinn trade. We saw that happen with the Roquan trade. They absorbed that salary, probably enables them to get an additional capital or better value in capital. So they got that in Robert Quinn. That made perfect sense. The Roquan situation I thought was really well explained by Ryan Poles today. One of those guys where, 25 years old, one of the top linebackers in the league, maybe not a perfect fit in the system, but I think the relationship was too far gone at the front office level. Poles addressed that basically today, so it made sense to find a taker. You could have maybe let him walk and maybe gotten a third round compensatory pick, a year from now. However, with $100 million, $125 million in cap space, they're going to spend money, so they're not going to get that compensatory pick anymore. So might as well get guaranteed value, which they did. A second rounder, a fifth rounder, just makes a lot of sense. Just building for the future. We don't care about this non-premium position, off-ball linebacker that doesn't really make sense for us to care about anymore, right? Let's go and ship that off, get draft picks, and here we go. We flip one of those, or it allows us to flip a second rounder for Chase Claypool. I'm with you, Kevin. I'm not necessarily a huge fan of the value, but I think the idea makes sense. I think Claypool is an excellent slot corner or slot receiver. I think he can be an awesome power slot. Would love to see him at tight end, honestly, like a receiving tight end. I don't want him at like number 1X. I don't think he's a great fit there, but I think he makes sense as a flyer. 24 years old.
He runs the most fly routes. That's what he's going to do. He's going to be a guy that's going to beat you with his legs. That's what he's going to be paid to do. They said this today. He wants to be what they want Luke Getsy to run, is they want him to be the Allen Lazard of this offense. And Bears fans are like, Allen Lazard sucks. We're not comparing the two. We're talking about the type of player that he's going to be in this offense. He's going to be the deep threat, throw the ball. Justin's got a great deep ball. We saw his receivers dropping them all of last week. Claypool doesn't have the best hands, but he's going to give you a better shot at converting those long plays and boosting your quarterback stats and confidence. That's why this trade was made.
I think the last interesting point there is, Claypool doesn't strike me as a hits player, at least from a just football smarts perspective. We obviously all so we all remember last year the game where he signaled first down, with the clock running and no timeouts left at the end of the game, which cost the Steelers a chance to win that game. I forget what primetime game it was. I forget who they were playing. But basically just no situational awareness last year. And that example is still buried in my mind. He's a violent runner with the ball. He's very physical. He can make tough catches. So I think that part is good. I think the Bears will benefit from that. Justin Fields will benefit from that. But you hope that he has some of that more situational awareness, some of that more maturity come in to play, because things like that is just not going to fly with Matt Eberflus. So I know that was last year. I haven't really been tracking the Steelers too closely this year because, well, obvious reasons. But we'll see how he kind of meshes with this culture. It's cool to see him, teamed up with Cole Kmet again. That'll be fun for the storylines. But it was worth a flyer. I mean, it's a second round pick. You get somebody who has been productive. He's still young, even if you get one more year.
Younger than
out of
Velus
him
Jones
year.
Jr. He's younger than
almost
Velus.
a full year. Yeah, younger than Velus Jones Jr. So it made sense. And at the very least, you raise the floor of this wide receiver room.
Two things I don't want to go overlooked in this. One, we've now gotten 2 media availabilities from Ryan Poles in the last week. The transparency is off the charts. We hear the word transparency all the time. It's been beaten into our brains as Chicago sports fans. But Ryan Poles is backing it up, and he's doing it. He's been so open and honest about how he wants to build this roster with all of us. He said what he's going to do, and he's going to do it. He was so honest today that it sucked to trade Roquan Smith, but he even said it was hard to get. He was asked by, I believe, Mark Potash. I don't remember who on the Bears beat. I think it was Potash who asked, was it hard to get this deal done without Roquan having an agent? The answer was, yeah, it made the process a lot harder. They weren't going to get a deal done, guys. That's why this trade was made. They got more value for him than letting him walk away. That's what good general managers do. They hop on opportunities that are there. That's the first thing. He's been open and honest, and he's clear. We didn't get that with Ryan Pace in all of his 7 years here. We never got that, especially in season talks. We never had those either. That's a huge underlying thing that I didn't want to go overlook today. The other one is the belief in Justin Fields and him earning this acquisition. This was made, I guarantee you, Justin was a part of these conversations. He's played well enough these last 3 weeks to earn this opportunity. A second-round pick is not a measly pick. Yes, the market said it. I don't think Chase Claypool is worth a second-round pick. The market made that opportunity so. Eric touched on it. There's not guys who are going to be available next year. And how often do we see rookie wide receivers come in and make a huge impact? People will point Justin Jefferson. People will point, Chris Olave this year. People will point to guys like that. But what are the odds that the Bears land one of those guys next year? That guy could get taken, top 6, top 7, and then you get the second guy who's just a tier 2 wide receiver again, and you're putting all the expectation on him to raise the floor of the offense. That's not going to happen. You know exactly what you're getting in Chase Claypool. Like you said, Drew, he's going to raise the floor of the offense. You know what you're getting in him, and you can still draft a wide receiver to give yourself a third weapon next season, and then the expectations are lower on that receiver. You can kind of ease him in because, again, we can't just expect a guy like Marvin Harrison Jr., who I would love for this offense next year, the kid out of Ohio State. Even if they pick him in the top 10, you can't expect him to come in here and automatically be a number 1. It's just not – there's not a lot of Justin Jeffersons out there. There's – it doesn't happen often. So this trade had to be made. It was made, and that's the part that I really like about it. I don't like the value for it because, I don't think Claypool is a guy that is phenomenal. I don't think, but he's got a year. He's got the rest of this year, a whole other year on his contract, and then you can decide what to do with him with the coveted franchise tag. It's a great general manager move. And here's what I mean by honesty, what we heard from Poles today. Here's what he had to say about trading Roquan Smith.
You couldn't find common ground with Roquan. Did you re-engage in contract or extension negotiations during the season? And if so, what came of those?
We gave our finals before the season, and we established that. So that's where we just couldn't find common ground.
How do you detail, I guess for us, but also for your leaders when you meet with them, why a guy that you believe so strongly in is no longer part of your championship vision in Roquan?
Because of what we just mentioned in terms of not being able to find common ground to continue to move forward. There is the reality of it is you have to ask yourself a question, are we ever going to find that middle ground? And from our previous conversations, you gather that information, and it felt like it was highly unlikely. So then are you able to then take the opportunity to enhance your roster now? Or are you okay with the chance that he walks away and we can't use some of that to enhance our roster? And that's what it came down to, and I felt like we had to move forward at that time.
I mean, so there you go. You don't get any more. I listen to a lot of NFL general managers and head coaches talk, and Eberflus kind of falls into this category sometimes after games. Just says random things that are just coach speak and covers it up just to get through and doesn't really give you details. Those details that Poles just gave, that's rare, and it's cool to hear him be open and honest about him being upset that he had to trade it, but recognizes the fact that it's a business. He had to do it. We gave our final offer. He said that right at the beginning. We gave our final offer. That's where we were. It wasn't going to change. Most GMs wouldn't have said that. I think that that's really awesome, and I think that that's a huge point of emphasis and needs to be a point of emphasis on this show tonight.
Yeah, I really appreciate, just like as someone who looks at these things, and I'm sure the way we all do, how would I approach this? How would I answer that question if I was Ryan Poles? And we all kind of formulate this answer in our heads, like, well, of course he would say it this way, or of course this is probably what happened. And to hear the general manager kind of say exactly what you think very likely happened, and then that happens to be the answer he gives to the media, is very cool. Everything that he said makes sense. The process, like I mentioned at the beginning, the process makes sense. You get to a point where it does not make sense to pursue this anymore because it's not going to happen. Very likely, we're not going to agree. He already asked for a trade. He already called us out for negotiating in bad faith. I mean, you don't just come back from that very easily, right? I mean, I understand that, he went to Family Fest, after that, the news release that he gave and kind of the letter he released, on his own. And then, he had some nice plays here. He had that interception that sealed a win. Like, everyone's happy. But, I mean, Poles has clearly been kind of, working on this in the background and finding that opportunity. And finally it came. And it just goes to show that, first of all, this NFL machine never stops, right? In terms of trying to find that right deal. It's insane.
Yeah.
And then they finally execute on the deal. They found something they liked. They weighed the pros and cons and they made the trade. Everything about this just screams good process. And we've been waiting for that since forever. And we finally are seeing it, which is great.
I think it also demonstrates that Poles has the one eye forward in terms of what's coming, because by grabbing Claypool now, he set himself up perfectly to and what he's made clear that he wants from the start, which is trench help, defensive line, offensive line, and free agency and the draft appear to be pretty strong in both categories. So now he can devote all those picks, all that money towards fortifying the fronts. So Justin Fields will have better protection. So the pass rush can get to the quarterback more often, which they have not been doing. I mean, I ran the numbers. The offensive line is on track to give up 65 sacks this year, and the defensive line's on track for 16 sacks total this year. And both are bad, really bad. So that's probably where Poles wants to invest the majority of his resources, but he can't do that unless he gets Justin Fields some weapons on top of that, which is why he made the trade for Claypool the way he did. But it's still reserving all the extra resources he has to focus on the areas he really wants to. So it just goes to show that he's always keeping the present and the future in mind, which is what good GMs are supposed to do.
To your point about foresightedness, I pointed out this detail in our chat earlier today, but just something very minor. Yesterday at I think 4:00 Eastern was the deadline in which you could restructure contracts so that some teams can absorb prorated portions of salary and whatnot. Otherwise, starting today or after 4 p.m. yesterday, all contracts just shifted to the other team. And what did Ryan Poles do? Right, he absorbed a lot of salary from the Robert Quinn trade, from the Roquan Smith trade, so that he can get a higher draft pick for exactly what Eric was just mentioning, positioning himself for the future. It's just minor details like that, I mean, shit, I didn't even know about that rule. I don't think it's a very widely discussed rule, but here's Ryan Poles keeping it in mind, making deals with that in mind, negotiating likewise, just awesome. And so to Eric's point, setting himself up for, I found a receiver that raises our floor, could at least be a wide receiver too, ideally a power slot if you find that number one receiver in the draft. All of a sudden, you're looking at a wide receiver drafted high, potentially, maybe second round, Darnell Mooney, Chase Claypool, Velus Jones Jr. as a wide receiver 4, hopefully re-signing Equinemius St. Brown. That's a pretty good room.
Not to mention you have the most feared rushing attack in the NFL, and I think it's trending towards a re-signing of David Montgomery next season too.
Yeah.
They got the money to do it. I think they're going to do it. They didn't trade him today. I think that's a big sign. Why change something that's working really well? There's so many parallels to this offense and the Packers offense because of Luke Getsy. Look at where the Packers are right now in terms of wide receivers, and this is going to parlay right into what I wanted to say next. Was the Packers wanted Chase Claypool too. They were in on Chase Claypool today. That's been confirmed from multiple sources and multiple reporters. There's so many parallels that the Packers recognized that they had a guy in Aaron Jones and they paid him. And without him right now, they would be horrid. That offense would be nothing. I think the Bears are going to recognize this. And Aaron Jones is better than David Montgomery, but I think the Bears are going to recognize it on a similar level to why change something that's working so well if they can go out and add more weapons. And Poles said this again in his presser today. You can never have enough weapons. So I think that means that I think David Montgomery is going to stay. I hope he does too, because I think a combination of him and Herbert are great.
I think the important thing with Montgomery is he's not going to command a huge payday if they do want to give him an extension. He's not going to command that $12 million tier that most of the top running backs usually reach when they get that extension. He's probably going to be probably somewhere more between 5 and 8 million, depending on where, that he ultimately falls this season in terms of his production. But I wouldn't mind extending him. It would probably be somewhere in line with like a 3-year extension, which I'm sure he would probably take it because it would still be decent money for a running back, considering running backs just don't get paid these days. But him and Herbert have formed a really strong tandem. This running game is their identity, and now they're starting to add more pieces on the outside, which should only help it because defenses won't be able to crowd the line of scrimmage quite as much because of Claypool's presence. So it all sort of works together.
Yeah, why change something that's working so well? That's my thing, and I think that
again, going back to the logic, going back to the seeing the big picture, seeing the entire picture, and Poles and Eberflus have shown that they have that from the start, which is really encouraging to see.
Yeah, I'm glad that Montgomery didn't get moved, and I know a lot of people were saying, "Oh, if the value's there, trade him." And I was there. But again, the value's not there for running backs. We saw Nyheim Hines get traded to the Bills for a bag of chips today. We saw a throw-in pick go to Bradley Chubb going to Miami. and they threw Chase Edmonds back, and like that's what running backs are worth. And trading a guy, he's more valuable to this offense than a 6th-round pick in a bag of chips. And I don't know. I think that's what they're going to build on next year. Go out. I still think they use that 1st-round pick on a wide receiver. Go out, fortify the offense, re-sign Montgomery. You got the money to do it now. Again, the $5 to $8 million, it would be what I expect. And we're getting a lot of comments in here, which is great. I love this. I'm seeing a lot of, and this is David. I haven't seen him in here before. So welcome to the Club Dub podcast, David. We appreciate you tuning in, Spadoni. Will the Bears re-sign Claypool once his rookie contract is up? Guess what? We don't know that yet. And polls, that's the best thing about the franchise tag and a guy under for the next season. You can figure out if he fits. Did you give up a lot to get him? Certainly. The value was high. But we don't have to know that because of the franchise tag. And I think that's the best part.
And I also think trading for him, sorry, Drew. I also think trading for him now makes even more sense because it gives you 9 games to see him in action, see him interact in the locker room, see all those things. And if the Bears like enough of what they see, I expect they'll probably will extend him depending on how he plays, during the offseason. Him and Mooney, I think they're probably focused on both because then you give your quarterback 2 guys that he can sort of build with long term because one's 24. I think the other one's either 23 or 24. So these are 2 young guys that can grow with your young quarterback, exactly what you want. And maybe you won't find that number 1 wide receiver this year, but it puts you in a perfect position to maybe draft that guy a year or 2 down the line. So it's just building things piece by piece, step by step, which is what good GMs are supposed to do.
Absolutely. And I mentioned this before when I was talking about the floor of this wide receiver room. You look at this offense now that they've unlocked some of these designed runs with Justin Fields, you have David Montgomery, Khalil Herbert, awesome rushing attack. You have tight end and Cole Kmet, who seems like he's starting to figure out a little bit. I think they probably need a second tight end there at some point. But, Cole Kmet, he's earning my intrigue, if you want to call it that, recently. And then you have the wide receivers like we just talked about, Mooney, Claypool. N'Keal Harry seems like he's starting to be worked in a little bit. Bayless Jones Jr. has some.
N'Keal Harry played very, very well on Sunday.
Exactly. Equanimous St. Brown, we've already talked about and we've liked, quite a bit, at least as that guy who's been playing that role. That's 4 receivers right there. Byron Pringle hasn't done anything. He may not be re-signed, but you're already talking about 4 receivers that have value in this offense already. Add a 5th. And then we're talking about a room that is very respectable. So that's actually quite a solid amount of weapons already. So it allows, that 1st-round pick to go to either offensive line or defensive line and fortify those trenches because, man, you saw what the Cowboys did to the Bears on Sunday. Imagine if the Bears could do that to a team every week. And they've done that this year, right? I mean, they did that to the Patriots. They did that to the Texans. I mean, they have been able to kick some ass up front on the offensive line in the run game. Imagine if they can do that in pass blocking, like the Philly offensive line. It allows them to dedicate those resources, and it's very exciting because they look like they are attacking this the right way, and it's just now it's just a matter of getting the scouting right.
Yeah, I love the linemen out of Northwestern. I believe they're right tackle.
Peter Skoronski.
Yeah.
I think he's a legacy guy. What wasn't his grandfather or father or uncle or something? Didn't he play for the Packers way back when?
I think so. Yeah.
He was a really good player. So there's bloodlines there, and I've always been a big believer in bloodlines that it sort of runs deep. So if they pick him, I'd be thrilled. Depends on where they're picking, of course, but I don't know if he's a top 5 guy, but if you can probably get him in the bottom half of the top 10, and I think that would be a really solid pick for the Bears if that ends up being the way they go. It would
fit their offense very nicely because he's going to be a top 10 pick, likely if he's still healthy. He was this season. I remember working at WGN. We're the home of Northwestern football, so I watched a lot of Northwestern games, and they're bad this year, no question. They're really bad. But the first 2 games of the year, Evan Hull was going off. Evan Hull is one of the best running backs in the Big Ten, and that has a lot to do with the offensive line. The Bears are, obviously have strong connections to Northwestern. I think that will be a guy they will look at right away. But if it's a back end 1st round, like if it's a back end to that, that 9 to 12 area, I'll tell you what, guys, I love Jalen Hyatt out of Tennessee, and I love Marvin Harrison Jr. out of Ohio State. I don't think that if those guys
I don't think Harrison's eligible. I think he's a sophomore.
I think he has 1 more year.
I thought he was a junior. He's a sophomore? I
No,
thought
he's
he
a
was a
sophomore.
junior.
Yeah, I think he's a sophomore.
That's a bummer. Well, what about Jackson Smith?
Jackson Smith Najigba.
Is he available, or is he also a sophomore?
Yes, he will
He's
be.
eligible.
Well,
Oh.
is he a senior? I don't know.
I think he's a junior or senior, but he's eligible. And then
Dang, I
I
thought
think
Marvin-
Jordan Addison as well.
I really
Yeah,
thought Marvin
I'm a big
Harrison
fan
was
of
a
Jordan
junior.
Addison,
Yeah.
personally.
Dang, that's a bummer. I
Probably
really
the
thought
best
Marvin
route
Harrison.
runner in the class.
A lot of
So
fun.
so you're still going line though? You're not going to go and try and get a big body number one wide receiver, because that's the only way you're getting one is through the draft. I don't think there's going to be one available unless you make a trade for one this offseason, but I can't really think of a team that's cap stricken like the Chiefs were with Tyreek Hill and they had to get rid of him, or a team like Tennessee that was looking to trade AJ Brown because they're entering a rebuild with a new quarterback and a new. I can't really think of a wide receiver one that you're going to be able to get outside of the draft. That's the reason that I think you got to look into getting one of those guys. That's a real bummer about Marvin Harrison. I really thought he was a junior. Damn.
It's just not an overall good class in terms of high-end talent, and there's a lot of injuries going on right now with this class as well. Matt Miller of ESPN pointed that out. So me personally, I think the Bears are going to be focused on offensive tackle, center, defensive tackle, and edge rusher. I think those are going to be the four positions that they target depending on where the board falls. Obviously, if a guy unexpected in another position falls that you just can't pass up the value, of course you consider that. But I think those are going to be the four positions depending on free agency that they end up targeting early in the draft in the first and second rounds.
And the other thing is you look at, some of the talent that's been picked up in the middle rounds. I mean, Alec Pierce was a second rounder who's been, a lot of fun. I just wish the Colts had better quarterback play this year.
Yeah,
Pierce has been
good.
great. He's been good. George Pickens, of course, is talked about. But I think you can find good wide receiver prospects in the middle rounds. But those offensive tackles and those offensive linemen, they usually, if you want them to start on day one, they usually got to be picked early. Same with those three techniques. So not advocating that the Bears necessarily draft for need. I think they're still going to go best player available. But if your board is giving you an equal opportunity there at offensive line versus wide receiver, I think you got to go offensive line.
Well, if you're just joining us here on the Clubbed Up podcast, a lot of viewers in here, a lot of new faces in the comment section. We want to hear your thoughts on this, guys. Seriously, this is a big day for the Bears. It's a trade that instills a lot of confidence in their quarterback. It shows a commitment to him next season. Trading a second-round pick means something. Ryan Poles said that he likes the progressions he's seen in Fields. He likes the way he's played the last 3 weeks, and I think it says a lot that Fields has really earned this the way he's played. Claudius tuning in, one of our great listeners. Did the Bears give their second-round pick or the Ravens? They gave theirs, so it's going to be a higher value pick. And this is where we were talking about the Packers, who were also in on Claypool, offered their second-round pick, but the Ravens went with the Bears because they believed it would be higher. The same thing happened in the Khalil Mack trade.
That feels good. Fucking legend, man. Fuck the Packers.
Never gets old.
That was awesome.
So I had to throw that soundbite in there.
The funny part is, the two picks that they have are literally right next to each other right now in the second round. The Bears are 43 and the Packers are 44. It feels like Pittsburgh is betting on Aaron Rodgers, sort of getting them, at least a little more respectable down the stretch, which I completely understand. It's a very valid gamble on their part, but the Bears can still at least make it interesting if they can win a couple more games and, lessen the impact. But I also don't think the Bears would be all that upset if they do end up with a top 10 pick in the first round, even though they did sacrifice that second round pick. I think they like the way this sort of worked out for themselves.
I'd also not necessarily, worry about the Ravens pick being that low. I mean, they've not looked that enticing this year as a team. Now, granted, they have the easiest remaining strength of schedule, so they could just go on a run here and make that pick in the
they've also
20s
battled a ton of offensive injuries, and they've been in every game. But they haven't been as good as they should have been.
Right, and I mean they could just make that moot, and so that pick ends up being a low second rounder anyway. But I mean, quite honestly, like even then, you have a high first rounder in theory. And which they could also if they see the value isn't there for what they want, or if the team desperately wants a quarterback, New York Giants, etc. They could trade back in theory, right? Pick up some extra draft capital. Now they've already secured Chase Claypool, and now that maneuvering looks a little bit more interesting. So I mean, they still have what, 5 picks in the first 4 rounds? Is that right?
Yeah.
So I mean, they still have enough draft
One
capital. They
first,
still have
one
picks.
second, 1/3, and 2/4. I believe that's
2/4.
the lineup,
That-
and 2/5.
that's
So
right.
most of their picks are in the higher rounds.
And which is excellent. I mean, in case they do trade back, they can pick up more draft capital there. They still have 8 picks, and then obviously more salary cap than they can do, than they can really dream to do with. So lots of interesting maneuvering. What I will be in. I mean, we'll talk about this over the many months to come, but I'm very curious to see what the plan is for spending in free agency. You can't spend $125 million of cap space.
My guess is they're probably going to spend on 2 or 3 guys.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they're going to go crazy. Poles has made it clear he wants to build through the draft, but this team is at a point where he needs to at least spend during one off season to sort of get things going.
Right.
And then as he continues to draft and develop guys, they're going to get into the compensatory formula and sort of try to do it that way, like the Ravens, the Eagles, the Steelers, all those teams. But he's going to have to spend probably, I think, again, I keep going back to this, but I think they're going to spend on the lines if they can, depending on who's available. So I would keep an eye on that. And, everybody thinks he's going to spend all that money at once and just go crazy, like maybe Jacksonville did or these other teams did. I don't see it that way. 2 or 3 guys at most. Maybe one blockbuster guy and then 2 mid-tier guys who he thinks can help the team, and then just sort of focus on the draft from there.
I tend to agree with you. There's no way they're going to spend all that money in the offseason, but I do think that there'll be more than 3 guys. I do think that they're going to try, and there's always cap casualties too from teams that have to cut, surprise players. I think there could be ways to work out trades before, guys get cut. They're going to need another corner next year. I know Vildor's played well, but you need another corner. You're going to need a couple linebackers. But again, I think the premium positions, edge rusher for sure, which is a real bummer about Bradley Chubb, who the Bears now have to play this week. He got traded to the Dolphins from the Broncos. Eric, you covered that extensively. A lot of thoughts about maybe the Bears going out and giving Chubb a big long-term contract this year. Broncos made a good trade. It's what you do with guys like that. They got a good, and it's a great trade for the Dolphins.
After what they gave up for Wilson, it was almost inevitable because they needed picks badly.
Yeah, so it's a good trade for them. I think you need to go out and you need to get a couple cornerstones if you can, though. An edge rusher obviously would be ideal. Edge rusher, corner, wide receiver through the draft. But you're right. Spending that kind of money is not viable in one offseason unless you have a team that is. If this Bears team right now, I would be cool with going out and spending all that money. If this team right now goes on a run, they win their next 5 games and they find themselves near a wild card spot and maybe they just miss out. I don't think that's going to happen. But if it does happen by a miracle, then you start to think about spending all that money to, go build for next season. But either way, I don't. You're right. I don't see that happening. It's a good problem to have all that money because it gives them flexibility to be super vigilant at next year's deadline, like they were this deadline. It gives them opportunities for cap casualties, guys who are going to get cut right before the season. So there's a lot of positives to having that much money, and it won't necessarily translate into guys on the field right away. But I totally agree.
And the reality is in the NFL, you're never going to have superstars at every position unless you're the Buffalo Bills, but
or the Rams,
or the Rams at some point, or the Chiefs.
That's what you build to, though. It's what you build to.
You build to, but I mean, all you need is that one weakness, or the weakness on your team to not be so unbelievably bad that it can just be a constant source of exploitation, right? You raise the floor from horrible to below average. It's a massive improvement. You look at this linebacking crew now with Roquan Smith gone, Nicholas Morrow maybe goes to the weak side, Jack Sanborn, undrafted rookie, maybe Sterling Weatherford starts to play a little bit. Who knows? I mean, but this is a group of unknowns. We're talking about a pretty bad group. If you can upgrade that in the offseason to below average, you have what seems to be a pretty solid secondary at this point. You got to upgrade that defensive line. You got to upgrade that offensive line. If Justin Fields is staying on this trajectory of going upwards, this team is going to be real frisky next year.
Mm-hmm.
One thing we didn't get to, what's that, Eric?
I think Justin's probably going to end up playing well over the next month or so because he's going to go up against a string of some pretty I don't want to say bad defenses, but some softer defenses. You got Troy coming up. Their defense has been terrible. Atlanta's defense hasn't been all that great. Miami, they've got some talent, but their defense, their pass defense specifically, has been struggling probably because their corners are banged up. So he's got a chance to play pretty well if the offensive line can even give him adequate protection. So it's really exciting to think that he can, really continue to build some momentum here in the next month or so.
Not to mention the offensive line played very well these last couple weeks. I know that Sunday, there's a good amount of sacks in there too, but the run protection and run blocking was really, again, just very, very good. Tevin Jenkins is turning into a star before our eyes. He's awesome, man. I'm a big I love watching him play every Sunday. He's going to be a fun one to build around. And keep in mind too, the Bears are down a couple starters on that line as well. So maybe when they get back, it only gets better. But one thing I didn't want to pass up before we wrap up the show here in the next 15 or so minutes was Robert Quinn also getting traded. We didn't get to do a show. This was a couple days ago. Got traded to the Eagles for a 4th round pick. Again, a guy who is he's going to be a free agent next year. The Eagles have said that they negated his final 2 years of his contract, giving him a little bit of freedom to go out and, he can figure out, he can do a little bit more. It's a win for the Bears, who likely, again, this is what I mean by cap casualty, or a guy that you maybe don't want to build around if you want to get younger next year. If Travis Gibson continues to play well, is a guy that could have been cut, and you go out and you get a pick for him in a year that you're not contending. It's a great trade. I just appreciated Robert Quinn for his leadership, especially showing up and during training camp and saying, I wanted to be here. And he's a veteran. He's never won a Super Bowl, and he was playing on a dog shit football team, but he never complained. And I don't know. I think that's really awesome. And for that, we just got to replay the sack record one more time.
Can't jumpstart this unit. Glennon looking at pressure. Football is loose again.
That's it.
There it is. Robert Quinn getting to Glennon. And he has just set a new single-season franchise sack record for the Chicago Bears. It was Richard Dent.
So there you have it, Robert Quinn. That was a pretty cool moment for him. I just appreciated him these last couple of years. He was a very good, he took a lot of flack coming in his first year when Pace gave him that big contract, and he was a little bit banged up with his back, and just unfortunate. That's the way the NFL rolls. If you're not healthy, and the Bears were contending that year, and he was kind of banged up with his back, he came back the next year and they weren't as good, but he showed the type of player he is, and it's very nice to see. I'm glad he's going to have a chance to win a Super Bowl this year.
Well said.
100%. I mean, he was never a distraction. He had the back issue or the club foot, whichever you want to pick, last year, or in 2020, excuse me. But he came around so well in 2021. He was the beating heart of that defense. He really earned the respect of all the guys in the locker room, and the fans learned to appreciate his effort to really improve himself. He could have just easily slid out of, doing anything in Chicago, gotten discouraged, all that stuff, but he came back, played the best season a pass rusher's ever had in this city. And, unfortunately he couldn't quite get the production going, but he was still a presence through those first few games for the Bears, and he did enough to get him a pick. And, they'll clear up the cap space next year. And I think it's a win-win trade for both sides. The Bears are rebuilding. They get some assets to work with. The Eagles get, somebody who's probably going to have a presence in the playoffs. He's going to probably not pop up much, but he feels like that acquisition that's going to pop off once they get to the big games, down the stretch, when he's been rested and not been the starter like he's been for Chicago. So I think it's a good trade that benefits everybody.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, obviously you tip your cap. I'm very happy for him to get the opportunity. Obviously, Matt Eberflus was and Ryan Poles were both kind of emotional about having to trade him, and kind of what he meant for the program as they implement the culture. You hope he goes out and wins one, because being an accomplished player like he is, I mean, you forget what he did before he came to the Bears. This guy's had a heck of a career. One of the very, very feared pass rusher back in the day. Obviously he's going to come to Soldier Field for a revenge game later on. I think it's in December, so we'll see him again here. But You hope he goes out and wins one. Philly is a heck of a team, so it should be fun for him. At least he'll go out there and have a chance to win and not be double teamed all the time.
Philly's having a heck of a time right now. Kyle Schwarber with a 2-run
Yeah.
nuke off Lance McCullers. He hit that ball about 4:30 up into the center field. Philly up 6-0.
Phillies are fun. They are fun.
Glad you guys are spending your time with us and not watching the World Series. But trust me, you're missing a great game if you want to go tune that on. I will not. Sure enough, I'd see like 10 people drop off right there as soon as I say it.
Meanwhile, the Bulls, they have turned it around. They're up 9 here in the fourth.
I saw Zach was having a good quarter. I'm going to go back.
Yeah.
Seems like when I don't watch the Bulls, they play a lot better. And when I'm zoned into them, and I'm, because I got really into them last year. Obviously, they, finally added some talent, and I got really into them. But every time I would watch, like most of their games, they would just suck. And then they got all banged up. And a couple games I've missed this year, they played really well. The ones I tune into, they're bad. So maybe I just can't watch. Maybe it's just me.
I think it's just you. Just you.
Just me. Getting a lot of comments coming in. Hector Lopez, appreciate you tuning in. Raging Oracle, baseball is dying. I disagree. Baseball is great. They just need a better leader up there doing both. Now it's 7-0, according to Hector Lopez. So there you go. It's been a heck of a sports day, man. Heck of an NFL trade deadline. One of the busiest we've ever seen. 10 trades, I want to say. What?
10. It was 10. That's a record
10
breaker.
trades, and the Bears were right in the middle of all of it with the two biggest ones, with the Roquan trade out to Baltimore, and then, that wasn't today, but, and then obviously acquiring Chase Claypool. So one last thing I want to mention about the Claypool thing. I didn't get a chance to see the national narrative on this because I was working all day today, but I did notice a couple clips on Twitter from guys on NFL Live and on ESPN circling the wagons about how the Bears were never giving Fields enough to work with. And while I think that argument is valid, and you can have that statement on it earlier in the season, to then have the same argument now that they acquired Chase Claypool for too much, there needs to be, and this is why I don't really listen to national arguments on the Bears, because the Bears are a punching bag on ESPN, and they have been for a long time. A lot from their own doing. They haven't been a well-run team in a very long time, if really ever in the last 30 years. So it's an easy team to punch down on. But a lot of these analysts need to do a little bit more digging before they just start blurting out things like that. I don't know. The moves everything that we just discussed about the Claypool acquisition, the process of it, it all makes sense. The market demanded that second-round pick. It's not saying Claypool is worth a second-round pick. It's just what the market was. And if you want your quarterback to get better, which is what he's going to be, the Claypool thing only makes them a better team. And it's such a lazy narrative to sit there and say, oh, he gave up too much money, still not helping Fields, should have done more in the offseason. They're doing stuff now because they recognize that Fields has earned it over the last 3 weeks. That's a good approach. That's a good process from a general manager. And I just wish some of these national narratives would change, but it just won't. I think Colin Cowherd is really good when he talks about the Bears because he's very fair and honest with it. But ESPN is almost unwatchable when it comes to talking about the Bears franchise. I don't know if you guys share similar opinions, but just from the few clips I saw today, it's such a lazy narrative.
It's always
Hot
bad.
Take Central. That's what it's become over at ESPN. I stopped watching them years ago.
Just dig a little bit deeper. I don't know. Like, you're getting paid all this money. Like, realize that Chase Claypool was playing with the ghost of Ben Roethlisberger, and he played pretty damn well in his rookie year. Now that they have
in the second year, he just didn't score as many touchdowns.
I don't. And then now he's playing with Mitch Trubisky and a rookie quarterback who's learning on the fly, and he's also got 2 other wide receivers that are pretty good on that. So it limits his targets, it limits his flashy stats. I think all of that needs to be much more at the forefront than just, oh, it's too much. Second round pick, too much. Bears blew it again. Like, maybe that's just me being defensive, but I really hate that. It's lazy analysis is what it is.
Can't really argue. I mean, Look, maybe they overpaid for him a little bit, but you always have to keep context of everything else involved. We talked about the free agent class being bad next year, so there's really not much you can do about that. That alone drove up the price. The Packers were pursuing Claypool. That also drove up the price. And the fact of the matter is, I don't think the Bears would have made that deal unless they got that second rounder from Baltimore for Roquan Smith. That softened the blow that enabled them to make the trade, so they still have a full slate of draft picks. In fact, more draft picks than a full slate of draft picks. And you still get a 24-year-old wide receiver who still has a year left on his rookie contract, so he's cheap in that regard. You have plenty of time to negotiate an extension, plenty of time to get him meshed with your young quarterback. It's a very logical trade in my regard. Maybe they overpaid a little bit, but I don't think they got fleeced or anything in that regard. It's a worthwhile gamble.
They didn't mortgage the future, like you said earlier.
This is what I'm saying.
Yeah, they didn't do it. All right, so Drew, rate it. Give me a grade. Are the Bears better with Chase Claypool? And what do you grade it?
It just in the context of this season or in general? Like, what do I grade? What do I grade
overall?
the trade?
What do you give the trade?
In a vacuum, I probably give it a C+. With the context that Eric just mentioned, I think I give it about a B. I think the only thing I would have probably liked instead was just not a second rounder. but again, given the context, it's hard to argue with it. I think he does have the opportunity to make him better. I just hope they figure out how to use him and not put him at, number one X receiver. I don't think he's the best fit there. Put him in the slot and he'll dominate.
Eric?
I give it a solid B. I don't think it's a steal or anything, but I think the fact that they had 2 second rounders, giving that up for him, you control him for another year for cheap. You got 9 games left to get him meshed with Fields. He's a very talented young man. He's only 24. People talk about the maturity issues in Pittsburgh, which I understand, but he's still growing. He's still learning, and he hasn't been a distraction this year. There's been nothing out of Pittsburgh to suggest that he's been a problem in that regard. He's been a problem in the past. I'm not going to deny that, but it looks like he may have been able to keep his head down this time. So he's learning in that regard. And he's coming to a team where he has a former teammate that he knows in Cole Kmet, so he'll be able to mesh with the locker room culture right away. I like the trade. I think it makes them better just in terms of their wide receiver room, in terms of talent and all that stuff. It makes them immediately better. Is he going to be a star? I don't know, but I think he'll be a solid piece, and that's what the Bears need right now, solid pieces.
Hector Lopez, B-. Anthony John Schneller, B. Appreciate you guys tuning in with those. Yeah, I'm with you. It's a B. It's a good trade. This offense is better with Chase Claypool on the roster. That's a fact. He is their second best wide receiver now. He gives Fields a legitimate downfield threat. He's going to open up Mooney a little bit more. There's a lot of great routes that we saw Mooney run on Sunday, a lot of great designs from Getsy. This only gives him more ammunition to work with. I look forward to seeing with 2 big wide receivers now that again, the N'Keal Harry trade I loved from the start. That this not giving up a 7th rounder to get him is nothing, and he's already made a 7th round. He's already literally made up for that. A touchdown in a game is worth more than a 7th round pick in the NFL. So he's already been a success. It's already been a successful trade. So this offense is better with Claypool on it, and I really. You're right. He's not their 1X wide receiver. I think you're right. Slot's good for him, but we need to just let Fields now do his thing. I'm so glad they didn't trade Montgomery. They got a great. Again, this running game is the thing of their offense. But if they can open up the passing game a little bit more and they connect on a few of those downfield passes that got dropped against that Cowboys team, we're talking about the defense was bad and they gave up 49 points, but we're talking about a game where they might have been in it had we had a couple of those downfield passes caught inside the 10-yard line. So this is a process. It makes sense. I like the move a lot by Ryan Poles. I'm happy with it. I'm happy with trading Roquan Smith. He's a great player. He's going to do well. He just wants too much money. And quite frankly, I don't think he's going to get it from Baltimore either. I think they're going to franchise tag him, and that's going to be a whole other situation. So
they're going to tag Lamar, so they might let him walk, actually. Let him walk, let somebody else sign him and try and get a 3rd round pick in 2024. That's kind of what they've done in the past. So that wouldn't shock me at all. Wouldn't it be hilarious if the Bears signed him back in the offseason because they've got the money? We'll just sign him back and ended up getting two draft picks from
You really
Baltimore
think
for
they're
him.
going to let him walk and not use the franchise tag on? And like you don't think they're going to give a
Not with the
contract
way things
to
are going
Lamar?
with Lamar. You got to save that franchise tag for Lamar Jackson. He's your franchise, man.
I thought they'd give him a
So
long-term deal. I know they've been at odds, but come on, man. That'd be dumb if they did not give him a long-term deal. That would be stupid.
Doesn't Lamar have his own Saint Omni or something?
I don't know. He's
I don't
acting
know.
as his own agent too. So now you've got
Yeah.
two guys to deal with in that regard. Good luck with that.
Oof. If any front office can handle that, it's the Ravens.
Oh, Baltimore is fantastic, but still, that's a challenge.
It is.
Yeah, no question. Well, what else do we have to add to today? What else do we hit on?
I think just a word of caution, I guess, for Bears fans is that someone like Chase Claypool or any move that they were going to make doesn't automatically raise the expectation for Justin Fields, right? I think Justin Fields has to still take those steps on his own. Ideally, some of that production will happen because he connects on some of those passes. Like I just take, for instance, I didn't like the first throw of the game against Dallas, the one to Equinemius St. Brown. Bad throw, underthrown. That didn't have a chance of being completed because of the way it was thrown. That Velus Jones Jr. throw, though, that was 50 yards of offense right there that was left on the field. So, passes like that, you just feel better in just the national narrative of Justin Fields because no one else watches the games like Bears fans, right? No one's going to remember that a 50-yard throw was placed right on the money and dropped, right? It's just, he went 13 of whatever it was, 17 for 130 yards. Like that's kind of what the box score analysis that the national media does. The narrative around the way Fields played, it can be helped, right? Assuming he continues to show the kind of progress he has the last 2 weeks, and some of those passes do get completed. So from a production standpoint, I definitely think someone like Claypool could help raise that gap or close that gap. But from a how does the quarterback play standpoint, these guys are not going to make Fields all of a sudden like a magician, right? He still has to continue to make those reads quicker, continue to do what he's been doing the last 2 weeks, which I think he has played quite well. Like I am genuinely impressed. Did not see the avenue for this kind of play even 3 weeks ago, just based on the way things were going. So good for him.
Mm-hmm.
Totally agree. Don't expect Chase Claypool to make them a playoff team. That's a good word of advice. Don't expect him to cut. He's a guy. He's a good wide receiver. Steelers fans, it's honestly the most divided Twitter I've seen in a long time. I was looking through comment sections today. A lot of Steelers fans that I know, they are fully on board with the trade. They don't like his TikTok dances. They don't like his distractions. We're going to see all that come out. But listen, the Steelers have offensive problems. They got an offensive line problem. They have an offensive coordinator problem. The Bears have an offensive coordinator who's done quite well these last couple of weeks. I look forward to seeing what he can do with Claypool and hopefully unlock him. He's only 24, and he's going to be playing with, the best quarterback that he's played with now. So the best version of a quarterback. Obviously, Ben Roethlisberger was great in his prime, but when Claypool was around, he played great for Ben, but Ben was on his last leg and wasn't at his best. So this is going to be a new opportunity, and it's exciting. And I think that Bears fans should be excited about it. This is a regime that is pointing towards investing in a quarterback. It's something we have not seen in a long time, if ever. That alone should be the best part about the trade today, even if you think it's too much money or too much to give up, which I think a lot of people do. Look at from the positive side if you need one. I think that's it. Club Dub Podcast presented by Sports Mockery. Find all the articles based on Bears talk. You can find all that online right now. There's a ton of them out there, a ton of new ones to go catch up on from today's deadline from Eric. Really looking forward to seeing what the rest of this season does and with this offense and how it's been rolling. Defense, not so much. But I guess we'll definitely see. Thank you guys for tuning in. Had a lot of fun viewers today. Had a lot of great comments and things like that. We'll be back at it again next week, and we will talk to you then. Peace out.